Ladies and gents, welcome back to Abe Thompson and Other Disappointments. Lots going on out there in the worlds of news, politics, dystopia, here in the formerly Great Britain. And as always, I'm right here with you to try and make sense of it all, to make sense of the senseless, as it were. A quick doff of the cap before we get started to the Patreons and the YouTube community members. Thank you for continuing to support the show and the punk politics stuff, and indeed those alternative paper reviews that I've been putting out most mornings for the last month or so. Now, veteran listeners of the show, my cult members, if you like, my people of the booge, my real binfluencer crew, will be aware that when the podcast began, it's over 2 years ago now, I think, it started off as very dystopian, very tech, very media focused. And it has sort of descended over that time into more satirical territory, certainly over the last year or so. Now, critics may argue that the vibe of the pod now is basically that its sanity has collapsed in parallel with my own, and indeed the sanity of the Western world. But occasionally we do like to dip our toes back into the worlds of media, tech, futurism, and to look at things industrially, you know, through a sort of faux academic prism, if you like. And what I mean by that is that I still love occasionally to get the odd guest on from a specific flavour, a specific breed, if you like, of media or tech, and to get a feel of their experience for how they've seen things change over the last few years, you know, and then maybe get a sort of view of how optimistic or how hopeful they are for the future, if only to sort of fill that gaping chasm within myself from where that is 100% absent within me. So if you've been tuning in for a while, you might recall I've had a few guests on over the last couple of years. There was Professor Ollie Mould from the Human Geography Department at Royal Holloway. There was Professor Martin Spinelli of Podcasting and New Media. That's at Sussex University. But then also industrially, we've had Ian Dale from LBC on. He's talked about his experiences within broadcast and news. I've had Charles Arthur on from The Guardian. And I spoke to him about what he refers to as social warming. That's social media's effects on political polarization now and then going forward. Anyway, you get the idea. So tonight, we're sort of going back into that vein. Tonight, I'm very excited to have a guest of similar prestige and a breadth of experience. He's been working in broadcast media, radio and mainstream television for almost 40 years. I used to listen to him when I was a kid as he hosted the Pepsi network chart on Capital FM. Please welcome to the show, Neil Dr. Fox. Woo!
Thank you. Thank you very much. What an introduction.
There you go. You've earned it.
Well, God, if I'd had a penny, well, I should sod that, a pound would be much better, really, for everyone that said, I grew up listening to you. And if you went on to say, I used to push play and record on my cassette recorder and try and cut you out of the chart, I'd get another quid.
Well, there you go. I mean, now I had that sort of banked in my head. I was like, shall I tell him that I used to record stuff on my NAS? Is that...
Look, those were in the good old days when you had to make a choice about buying music, right? So you either listen to it on the radio or you listen to the records your mates had bought, or if you were lucky, you went out and bought some stuff yourself. But you had to really think about what you were going to buy. And when you couldn't afford it, because music was expensive, you push play and record, and you try to work out that time when I was just about to talk on the radio. And you'd push it, cut me out. And then as soon as I'd finished, you'd play it, you'd push record again until you cut all of me out of the link. That's fine.
I suppose it's like, it's like mixed blessings when somebody says, like, I used to listen to you all the time. And then they kind of bookend it with, like, I did used to kind of cut you out of the stuff, though.
Yeah, it's fine. They were listening. They counted it as a listener. That obviously, and the listening figures counted. And if their figures were really good, we got paid more. So you know what? I was happy. At the end of the day, I was happy. No, it's good. It was part of people's experience. I did the same when I was a kid, listening to Tony Blackburn do the chart. I didn't have a cassette then, but, you just want to listen to the songs. That's what it was all about on a Sunday afternoon.
Sure. And it's actually one thing I wanted to to get your thoughts on. I suppose my first question for you would be like, look, if we look back at that Pepsi network chart period, and then you went on to Pop Idols sitting alongside Simon Cowell, and then there's all of these Sony Radio Awards and Smash Hits Poll Winners Awards, and like, how does it feel to have come up that trajectory, which is all very impressive and everything, but to have now reached the peak by appearing on this podcast?
Yeah, I know. It's something that obviously 40 years ago, I knew there was something to look forward to. I didn't know this. Clearly, you weren't even born then. But, yeah, I made it. I made it eventually. But no, it's good. Look, I've been very lucky. I did start it was 40 years ago. Back in 1984 was when I first appeared on my very first radio station, which was called Radio Wyvern, which was back in what was called Independent Local Radio, ILR, which were about 130 stations in the end, all those classic local stations that a lot of people have grown up with: Capital, Piccadilly in Manchester, Metro in Newcastle, BRMB in Birmingham, Clyde in Scotland. These really big stations that really became massive in their local communities. And all of that sadly has gone. All of that has now gone. Radio's changed so much. It isn't for the better. It's for the better for some people's bank accounts, but it's not for the better, I don't think, I would say, for the radio industry in general, because you have three massive groups that own everything now. You got the BBC, who I kind of just think, most of it seems, for me, just needs to be completely rethought. They need to rework how they finance the whole thing. They need to cut down an awful lot. They just need to have a few radio channels and 2 TV channels, and then just compete commercially with everyone else. But I'm sure maybe we'll talk about that later on. And then you've got Global Radio, who basically Capital, LBC, Heart, Smooth, Radio X. So they've got an awful lot of radio covered and have just gobbled up all those little local stations just to become big national brands. And Bauer have done the same. They've got Magic and they've got Kiss. And then they've got Greatest Hits Radio as well. So between those three, they probably own, I think, about 96 or 97% of every radio station people listen to in this country, which is just shit, really. I think it's just too much, really. But and they do it really well, don't get me wrong. They do what they're doing very well, but what you've got is it all sounds the same. It's all very big and branded, and there isn't any quirkiness amongst it. It's all very safe to me. And that means safe equals a bit dull after a time. And, it's very predictable. But, and all those local stations, it's funny how when you think of voices on TV and voices on radio, we've gone from what was very home counties to, in a way, very eclectic now. So a lot of the main voices you hear on telly and adverts everywhere are regional accents from everywhere, which is sort of brilliant now. And yet on radio, you don't really hear that because all of that's disappeared.
I was thinking, like, it's a shame. And look, I don't work in professional broadcasting. I do this as a side gig, and I'm very passionate about it. But it's not, I just want to be clear about that. But my perception of local radio, from what I've heard from my old man, because he worked in the game for many years, is that back in the day, local radio used to be a sort of training ground. Like, you would have people coming up volunteering to do the night shift, to cut your teeth in what it means to do like live radio, to interact with listeners, take calls and so on, think on the fly. And then those guys would rise up and they would be the faces or voices, more accurately, of your Capital, of your Radio 1 and so on. And my perception is now that a lot of the local radio, not only has it been bought up by the big boys, but it's also, is it not like all syndicated and largely voiceless, just like Greatest Hits stuff happening?
I think there is a lot of that, I think, yeah. And a lot of it all comes from, say, Leicester Square. It's most of global stuff. And this is where things need to change. We're in a slight interim period at the moment, I think. So you've got regulators saying that if you want to have a local license, for example, in the Newcastle area, you've got to have a local show coming from there. So so Heart will be basically the entire day will come from London and Leicester Square, but you'll have one local show. It's sort of in a way a box ticking exercise. So it still keeps the regulators happy, but it's not really right. It's not one thing or another. And eventually all that will go. They'll change all that. And they've got to change it, really, because otherwise, commercially. So on the one hand, I'm not sort of knocking the big boys, but, commercially, they've slightly got their hands tied, even though they've got giant monopolies, because on the one hand, you've got that, and then you've got this, in a way, this ridiculously outdated institution called the BBC that, we still I have to buy a license to listen or watch the BBC. I listen to nothing on the BBC.
Yeah.
I watch literally nothing on the BBC, and yet I have to pay for it. And in a world where you go, well, I'd like to listen to, no, I'll get Apple TV for £7.99 a month. That's my choice. It's got some good stuff. If I don't like it, I can always say I don't want it.
Yeah.
Similarly with Netflix or Disney or Paramount, with a zillion channels and choices, you kind of go, do I want it? Do I want to pay for it? Yes or no? And you do kind of go, so this, it seems so out of date that someone's going to go, you have to have a license to listen to TV. So my kids who are 22, 21 and 17, they kind of go, well, that's bollocks, isn't it? Why do I have to have a license? You kind of go, well, technically, I know you're at university and technically your house needs a license. And they go, well, we haven't got a telly. I just watch everything on my laptop.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, why do I have to have a license? And it's really hard to explain, well, that's sort of the law. And they go, well, that's a ridiculous law.
I feel like I'm
so right in the midst with the people at the BBC have got some big thinking to do, because they're going to have to end up with some kind of pay-per-view model at some point, where they're going to have to actually go, if we really think we're that good, then we're going to have to say it's $4.99 or $7.99 a month, and then you can get all of this. And if you want BBC Sport, it'll cost you a bit more. They'll have to go down some kind of funding model like that, knowing that an awful lot of people will just go, well, I don't want you. Yeah. But then you've got to cut your cloth and just go, well, maybe we can't have 7 different national radio channels and BBC local radio and about 5 different TV channels. You just go, well, maybe we have 1 or 2 and say 3 big radio networks. Again, like, you have to be commercial, right? You have to look at it commercially and go, how many people want to watch this now? And be relevant for 2024 and the future.
I feel like I'm sort of stuck in the crosshairs with that, because I accept and like even the fact that we have a public service broadcaster that is, at least on paper, politically neutral. I think there's a place for that. I also agree that it's probably got a bit out of hand in terms of, like, whenever I hear a promotion for like Radio 1's One Big Weekend, or like something like, I'm like, does the BBC really need to run its own festival? Does it? It's like little things like that, or indeed, the 100 odd or 150 odd BBC radio stations out there. I'm a bit like, surely it would be possible to run BBC News 24, BBC One, and then I get into the next juncture of thought where I go like a level deeper, and I'm like, in an age or in an era where linear broadcasting is gradually disappearing, and as you point out, things are moving more progressively into a pay-per-view, like on-demand model, then how can you realistically continue to ask people to put their, I don't know, I feel like maybe they should get rid of the TV license and just fund it through tax, maybe? I don't know.
Well, yeah, that will be a thought, wouldn't it, really? But I think I think they've definitely got to cut down on the amount they offer, because there's so much out there from all the other streaming platforms who are doing brilliant jobs as well. I mean, although we do some great drama and some great TV in this country now, when you compare it to some of the stuff that's on offer with like Apple and Netflix, where you can chuck basically movie budgets and create every, a 10 episode series where every episode is like a movie. They're incredible. Yeah. With the same directors and actors. You kind of go, this is really good stuff. I don't really watch anything anymore. I mean, I don't actually. And I really genuinely say there's nothing I watch on the BBC. And you mentioned earlier, we should, on paper, it's a really nice idea to have a public service broadcaster. And I'm nodding, going, yep, I agree. And technically they should be politically neutral. Well, they're not, though. I mean, so here, like, they're not. They really aren't. They're biased, and we don't want bias. So if they did do what none of the other services do, and just literally give you, here are the facts of the news today. This happened today.
Yeah.
That would be refreshing. And that would be, I think that would be a really good reason for existing, because you'd go, everyone else has got political bias, but they'll go, well, I don't know, we pay for it, you don't pay for it, it's free. So if I want to be Fox and want to be really biased towards Trump, we can be. But I think the Beeb should be if they could be neutral, but I don't think they are.
I don't think it's possible for anyone to earn that medal of being politically neutral at this time. I think everything's so polarized and divided that even if you did have a completely neutral, fact-based report on, let's say, Brexit or Ukraine, or like, there's always going to be a subset of people out there who don't like what they're hearing, and they will shout it from the rafters that was biased, that it was unfair, that they didn't ask the right experts or contributors. So, yeah, maybe they're on a hiding to nothing, really.
Yeah, well, that is hard. And of course, look, you have finite time to broadcast the news. So if you've got half an hour, someone has to make the decision, what stories do you put in there? I mean, literally 24-hour news could be just literally full of different stories. But if you've got a half-hour news program, someone, the editor, is making a decision what we put in there. And obviously some people will go, well, why didn't you put this in? And other people will go, well, why did you put that in? So yeah, I agree. You're onto a bit of a hiding for nothing. It's a tough one. But I used to, the current director general and what have you, I weirdly used to work with him because he used to be part of the Pepsi Network chart show team. He worked at Pepsi when we were starting the Pepsi Network chart show. So, and he's a very shrewd commercial operator. To me, it's not a surprise that they've chosen someone who's commercially super savvy, right? Because you need someone in that job right now who can go, okay, the world is commercial. We're in a way this strange being that isn't, and we have to try and find a modern way of existing. Because I wouldn't want to get rid of the BBC. I don't want to just get rid of it. I think they do some things, like obviously people always point to the natural history programs. They do them brilliantly. Yeah. They often do them in conjunction now with other people as well, because to put those programs together is super expensive. Yeah. And but they do have, some of the best people in the world clearly that do it. And some of that stuff is brilliant. The way, I suppose I used to say the way they used to do sport was fab, but reality is sport's gone to the highest bidder now. So, football, football doesn't exist really apart from on Match of the Day. It doesn't exist anymore, live footy. They've got the rugby, obviously, but they've got second tier sports in a way. But in a way, it's good that they have that stuff and there is access to that for free. Well, I say for free. People say it's for free. It's not. It costs you 15 quid a month. Yeah. And you have to think of it like that. It's cost you 15 quid a month to watch that. And, well, okay, Apple's only $7.99 a month. So you go, oh, okay. So it's not that cheap. Some people say it's very good value. Obviously, if you look at Sky, it's expensive. And if you want all the sports channels, it is. Really starts, oh, blimey, how much am I paying a month? You look at it and go, shit, I can't believe it.
The thing I never get about the Beeb is... so when we look at the nature shows, right? I agree. That is a style of show that is quite expensive commercially. I wonder if it makes a return, but it doesn't feel like the sort of thing that ITV or like Sky maybe even would produce, because commercially it would be such a risk to throw that much money into a nature show. Yeah. So I think that's really good that they do that. The thing that confuses me about the Beeb is I'll look at the Saturday listings every now and then, and most of the shows will actually be carbon copies of what has been commercially successful on ITV or whatever. And then I'm like, why do you feel the need to produce commercially viable shows when you're not commercial? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I guess there's always been, and I think we used to have this to a certain extent with radio, that Radio 1, obviously, if you think Radio 1 started in 1967, and Tony Blackburn, who's just turned 80, wasn't it? When he was doing the first Radio 1 breakfast shows, his daily audience was 23 million. Yeah, and you go, oh my God, that's insane. You go, yeah, there was no alternative. I mean, that was it. That was your choice, right? It was that or nothing. But from those days, and then of course you had in 73 commercial radio started, and there was now competition. And then probably in the late 90s, we started to have a lot more commercial radio starting when FMs and medium AMs started to split. And then we had DAB. So now there are literally thousands of radio stations you can get. There's almost too much. It's a bit like TV. There's too much. How do I know what to listen to or how to watch? But
that must have been a weird period to live through, because you were doing the Pepsi Network chart at a time, as I mentioned, when I was a kid. And that pop culture universe seemed so electric and massive and glitzy. Like there was pop superstars. Like, I mean, I know that we have Beyonce and Rihanna and stuff now, but to contrast those with like your Michael Jacksons and Madonnas back in the day and your Guns N' Roses with whoever the big band is now is just, to me, like there's no comparison. These were colossal stars. And as you've pointed out, there was more selection radio wise, but still not like loads. There was Capital FM, there was Radio 1, and then there was like MTV Europe around that same sort of time. So it felt like that was a really electric time to live through. But then it must have, as you mentioned, it must have sort of like diluted itself a little bit more as more of these stations came online, as MTV Europe turned into MTV UK, and all of these other music video channels started exploding. And now we get into a period where we're at now, where there's not just loads of music video channels, there's not just loads of DAB and FM options, but there's also people like me who are like creating podcasts who are also pulling people's attention away. So did it feel at any particular time like you were like, oh man, I missed like 96 or 95 when it was still,
Oh, look, there's no doubt that I think the times, I feel very lucky, actually. I'm a 62-year-old bloke, right? And I feel very lucky in the sort of generation I've grown up in. Because I think when I started playing on the radio, I was playing 7-inch singles. Right. 7-inch singles, and very quickly I was also playing CDs. Then, of course, we started moving. As things started, the technology has changed an awful lot, right? So if you go from a few radio stations playing singles to then a few more playing CDs, that's all fine. It was still, radio was very big. You had big record companies who were basically, working well with the radio stations. If you didn't get on the radio, no one was going to hear your song. So you needed the radio. So we worked really well with all the record labels. They were signing people and putting a lot of money into artists. And you have to remember that out of 10 artists, probably one of them became successful through a record label. And that meant that if you're a label and you've signed someone, your A&R department, your artist and repertoire signed a new band, right? You then got to go into a studio and produce it, make it look nice, make a video and what have you. And Simon Cowell, before he was a TV star, he was a really good friend of mine, and he used to run a small record label called Fanfare and was always a big record man. And that's where his genius was, and it still is really, knowing what people like to listen to. So as a record man, and I knew him really well, he'd go, to put a new band out there costs £1 million. Costs £1 million to maybe make an album, produce an album, make some videos. It's £1 million. Now, if you think you might have 10 acts and out of them one does well, that means 90% fail. That's a lot of money that you are losing. So it was not a very good model. So I think the record labels had to try and find a better model. And while all that was happening, came this digital revolution. So if you think of Napster, that then turned into, say, iTunes, and then the music streaming platform, Spotify and Amazon, that's completely changed things. Absolutely transform the music industry, because the music industry was slow and lazy and didn't see it coming. But what it meant was, in a way, no one ever had to, no one buys a record unless you go out and buy a vinyl copy.
Yeah, it's done.
Although it's growing, it's a very, very small percentage. When we've ended up in the situation that you can get every record that's ever been made, pretty much, for £7.99 a month. When the last album I bought cost me 13 quid for one album. Yeah. And when you're a kid growing up, you had to think, what am I going to spend my pocket money on this week? Will I buy it on that single or that single? Right. Now you just think I have everything. And it's almost made music worthless, sadly, because you can just go swipe, 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 swipe. So the idea of, in a way, you've grown up in an era where you probably had favorite bands, you got the record, whether it was on an album or a CD, you pulled open the record sleeve, you read the notes, you learned the lyrics. Who gives a shit who produced it? But you knew who produced it, what the fan site was. You knew lots of info, and you felt you had invested time and effort into really liking a band. And we don't quite have it in the same way now. So even actually the acts you say, like Rihanna and Beyonce, you got to remember they started 20 years ago, amazingly now. Right. So they were sort of just in the early days of digitization, when labels were still signing people and still making big stars. And I suppose a lot of this has come to the light recently with what happened with Taylor Swift. And she was all saying, well, I can't believe that my label sold all my stuff and they were going to have my rights forever. That was kind of the record. That was the model. Hello, you're a new artist and you have nothing. I'm going to invest £1 million into getting you in a studio, making a lovely album with a great producer and making videos. So far, it's cost you nothing. Right? I'm putting all the risk up. And the other side of it is you'll make a load of money, but I've got the rights to this album that I've basically funded forever. Now, of course, some people go, forever? That seems outrageous. But it was sort of the model, and everyone sort of was quite happy to a certain extent with the model. Then when you got better known, you could maybe go back to your record label and go, hang on, can I have a slightly better deal? I want a better percentage. And I don't think that quite the truth about what's happened with Taylor Swift. And I was talking to a mate yesterday who was involved in all that and knew all the facts. And he went, actually, her and her family and her father did have quite a good stake in the record company that owned her.
Right.
To start with, but she just wanted total control. So she has gone, very ballsy, has gone, I'm going to re-record all my albums.
Yeah.
Right. And actually she's done deals with the big radio networks that go, I will come and do a free gig for you guys every year, but you can't play any of the old Taylor Swift albums. You only have to play the new ones. So I get all the rights. Yeah. So she's got the power. And of course, other artists now, but it's what I'm saying, it's changed the whole relationship between label, artist, and radio stations. It's all changed now. The streaming platforms have become very, very, very powerful.
You know what's interesting though about that is so again, I'm not in the music industry, but I know people who have been signed to labels, and they've told me fucking horror stories about the contracts that new artists are being signed to now, where 20 years ago, as you say, somebody would put up a lot of money. They'd put some cash into a music video, the promo, getting nice photos taken, the recording process, etc., etc. But then the record company would take X amount of profits from the record sales is the key thing. Nowadays, as I'm sure you're aware, but listeners may not be, the record companies are like, well, nobody's really buying records anymore. And effectively what we are now is a marketing agency. So we're going to sign you to our veritable marketing agency. And then when the streaming is not really going to pay anything, so we won't make any money from the streaming. However, we do have a stake in Spotify, so we've got some equity there. And then the way that they make their money back from their investment is they take money out of the touring revenue, which I don't think they ever used to do. I think that was the artist can run their own tour and sell the merch. And now obviously we have income coming in from social media, but the record company will now take that as a 360 deal. Everything is up for grabs. They're like, if we spend this money promoting you, you're going to become a big star, and we want a little piece of everything. Every way that you make money comes back to us now. Isn't that horrifying?
Well, look, I would say, knowing quite a lot of deals that have been done or people that run those labels, I would say, look, it's changed. I think what the record labels have learned is there might be some shitty deals out there which sound horrible, but I think in general, the majors sign better deals now with artists because they have to, otherwise the artists won't go with them. But you're right, they're sort of distribution marketing platforms, but they still have an awful lot of power. So a lot of people there are very few artists would not like to be with a label. It sounds great being all independent, but then you go, so who's going to so when you want to go out on tour or want to try and get a support slot on a tour, it costs money to go into rehearsal rooms, to get a band together, to get session musicians to come out with you. It costs a lot of money. So, for example, I know a new young artist at the moment with her. I was talking to her manager yesterday. It's going to cost 50 grand to get her ready for a tour with rehearsals and 50 grand, right? So it's a lot of money. But, if you think you've got, a couple of weeks in rehearsal rooms and you've got to get a band and they all need to pay, I don't know, 100 quid a day or whatever you pay them, it really adds up. And then you've got to do their transport and hotels. And so I think you have to remember it's an expensive business, this is. And people often only look at, okay, if you look at a successful person and look at Taylor Swift, she is like an economy in her own right now.
Yeah.
But she's almost too crazy. If you come one notch down and go, I don't know, let's say Harry Styles, who's enormous, but just a superstar, not a global, not mental like she is. But to put him on tour, it costs a fortune. But you look at the success stories and you see what they're making, and you think the people who are invested in him are all making good money. But all the ones that don't make money, that aren't massive, they need funding too. And I kind of think you have to remember sometimes, I'm not defending record businesses, because I think there've been some dreadful deals done over the time that were too much like handcuffs. But I think it has got better. But they do now they don't make money out of record sales, you're right, unless you're Ed Sheeran and you're having billions of streams when they're making fortunes. But your average person isn't making money out of that. They still make money out if you get your record played on the radio. There's still money that comes from PRS, Performing Rights Society. You still make money from that if you get a big radio hit. But also their big money now for all artists is going out playing live. But going out playing live is expensive. And a lot of smaller and mid-sized venues, sadly, post-COVID, a lot of them are closed and they can't afford it. A lot of that is because artists have really put their money up because they're trying to earn a living out of it. So it's a bit catch-22 at the moment.
Yeah. Well, also people are broke now, like they haven't been for a long time, right? So if you look at people's disposable income and what they can reasonably buy with that, in terms of like how many pounds per the pint that you would spend on a night out.
Yeah.
Like, ticket prices, I don't actually maybe I'm being really naive here, but I don't think ticket prices have gone up that monstrously in the last 20 years. I think it's more to do with getting the taxi down to the station, getting the train in and back, getting some food while you're out, having 3 or 4 beers while you're watching the band. So yeah, it's changed the game, hasn't it? Do you feel
it's very expensive going out to a CA gig, and going to festivals is nuts now.
Yeah,
it's
nuts. Do you feel, just to bring it back to radio specifically, do you feel like what we're talking about with artists, with Spotify being this sort of endless universe of new music and swipe culture, do you feel like there's an element of that with radio? Like it's not special anymore because you can always flick to another station, you don't build up a relationship with the presenter in the same way? Or do you think maybe podcasting has kind of filled that gap? Or...
It's interesting, because, I'm involved at the moment with trying to build a new music platform that we're going to launch later this year, that is all about people's favourite songs and why they love them. Okay, so it's getting back to the emotional experience of why we love a song, rather than just it's a song that might be special to someone and why. So it makes it a bit, and I think what's really happened over the last, let's say last 20 years, since digitization, since streaming platforms have begun, I think what's interesting is that I think radio stations, 2 things have happened. One, you've got these big stations buying up every other little station and creating national brands. So you've got Heart, Capital, Magic, Smooth. You've got these big brands out there, okay? And they've become kind of quite bland because you know exactly what you're going to get 24/7. Now, they've reacted, in the same way I think that publishing, say 20, 25 years ago, started to have a steady old decline because along came this thing called the internet. So why do I have to buy a mag for £5 when I can just look at it and pretty pictures? Right. So people weren't buying papers. They're not buying magazines. It's that slow, steady decline. And I think radio, if it's not careful, will do the same. It's already seeing that. So no kids listen to the radio. They don't listen to the radio because and this is sadly really black and white. But so if I speak to my 22-year-old daughter, so Scarlett, apart from when I'm on the radio and it's kind of on Alexa, in the kitchen, they would never choose to listen to the radio. And I kind of go, why? And they go, I don't need to. If I listen to any station, they'll play the same songs literally on rotation, the smaller and smaller playlists on rotation, with lots of adverts.
Yeah.
And some pretty dull people in between them that aren't very entertaining. So why would I do that when I can just make my own playlist and play what I want, when I want? And you go, there's no argument for that, right?
Yeah.
So you go, that's very true. But that's sad. So it means if you look at the latest radar figures that came out this week, which is the way that radio gets surveyed, stations like Capital are just dying. They're dying on their arse because they relied on younger people. That was a younger audience. That when I was on Capital, it was a more mainstream audience.
Yeah.
Now they've got Heart in their family as well. Heart's become the big mainstream 30 plus brand.
Right.
So if you're going under that, so they were targeting younger people on Capital. It's a hit 40 top 40 station. Kids are going, why would I listen to this? I've got TikTok, I've got Reels,
Do you think,
I've got Spotify. Why would I need to listen to that?
is there an opportunity there for them to? So we talked about newspapers a second ago. You mentioned newspapers and like dwindling, like the publishing industry and so on. And what I noticed with papers is that like reporting the news and just what happened to people is done because everybody's got the push notifications on their phone when it happened at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They don't need to wait until the next morning, 8 a.m. They pick up a copy of the Sun. It's like literally old news by then. And so what I noticed was like newspapers and to some extent like news stations pivoted aggressively to opinion. So now you have the Daily Mail's opinion on the front page.
Yep.
Now you have your GB News, your Sky News panels, you have LBC panels, and that's where people go for their analysis now to gain a deeper understanding or have somebody explain to them what happened and what they feel about it. And I wonder, like, is there an opportunity there? Like if Capital looked at it like, look, nobody's coming to the radio to hear their favourite new song, their favourite new artist. Is there a possibility that we pivot to maybe a talk radio wouldn't work, but something around like, we're going to tell you about this artist. This is where you come for the interviews. Here's a backstage thing. You know what I mean? Is there a thing?
Well, I definitely agree with you that I think they probably need to address that. I mean, I think radio in general needs to. I work every day for a network called Nation Radio, and we're a much smaller. We're probably the fourth biggest network. But the difference between us and Bauer, which is the third, is a bit of a quantum leap, got to be honest.
Right.
But I suppose we have the ability to be a little more flexible and maybe play more music, more songs. So we're not so tight on our playlist. I mean, I think what's happened is that, there's always a great argument between jocks, DJs, and our program directors, right? And trust me and Chris Tarrant say back in some of those meetings 25 years ago back at Capital, so we had a legendary program controller called Richard Park, this Scottish bloke who was a genius when it comes to programming radio. He ended up being the headmaster on Fame Academy. Okay. And probably I don't think there's anyone better in Britain still, and he's like in his late 70s, to understand music radio. But music radio has changed and music streaming has changed it. And I think what they've done is they've gone, right, people are listening to us for less and less time because they have this other way now of getting their music. We used to be the only way, radio, that you could listen to music, really. Now there's this other way, and it doesn't really cost very much money. So if you like music, we've all got a music streaming platform on our phone somewhere, right? So their argument is that, so we have to make our playlist so tight so that if ever anyone turns us on, they'll be hearing a big banging song that they love. Now, the problem with that, so our argument, and it was 25 years ago, it's the same then, it's probably even more now. You go, so why are people listening to us less and less? Is it because of something else, or is it because we keep playing less and less songs more and more times? It's which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I think it's interesting you say, look, podcasting's become very, very popular around the world. And I think what streaming platforms don't give you is any form of connectivity. It gives you all right. Just get any song I want anytime. Brilliant. Okay. But it's sometimes the bits in between, the DJs, the entertainment, the competitions, phone-ins, whatever. That's what was the human connection. I'm sitting here in my car here and someone else is there and you're in an office here and I'm having a bath there. And in the middle was the radio station, played a song and we were all listening at the same time. And I don't think many of us anymore, sadly, do many things at the same time. The only thing we probably en masse do together now is watch sport. For sport, there's that great advert Sky did a couple of years ago. It said it's only live once. And I think that's true. So you kind of go, I can watch the Chelsea game from I could watch it on catch up, but really I need to be watching it to really get the excitement from it. And I think there aren't that many things on telly, really. If you look at even massive shows like Strictly Come Dancing, the figures are so small compared to what they were in their height.
Oh yeah, but then that kind of goes back to like the choice and the supply, doesn't it?
It really does. We've all got lots of choice now, which is brilliant. But I guess it makes it harder sometimes for those, in a way, the slightly more traditional linear players.
Is there any? I'm going to muck rake now a little bit. Is there any like DJs or big names, or maybe you don't need to name them, but you could just tell me if there were like where they got maybe like 5 million listeners or 10 million listeners back in like 1995, and they thought, oh, it's because I'm amazing. It's because I'm drawing in 5 million or 10 million listeners, and now like time has moved on. And it's actually shown that it's like now there's way more choice. So people aren't enslaved, for want of a better word, to that one conduit. Yeah. And now it's like their ego has to reckon with the fact it wasn't really you. It was, you know?
Well, no, I think the reality is I don't think we can do our job unless you've got a pretty decent sized ego. Right? Yeah. There's got to be something about, although there are different kinds of DJs, right? So if you were people like John Peel was always about the music. Right, so he was a music guy, right, and he got famous for being the bloke that championed new music on Radio 1.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was like an ego jock, but I think all of those, in a way, like me and so many others that have been big time DJs, breakfast jocks, and all that stuff, we've got to have a certain amount of bravado because we're entertainers. That's our job, is to entertain on the radio. That's been our job. So, and I think we've probably all at some point, I definitely can say for myself, we all think we're the dog's bollocks. But then you have to realize that the station is always bigger than you. I mean, that is the reality. It's a bit like football players. They're genius football players, but, you know, the team, like Man United's always going to be bigger than any one player that goes to play for them, really. Similar for any big club. And I think none of us want to actually admit that, but I think the truth is, if you've got a great DJ on a big station that has a lot of listeners anyway, you can tell whether they like you or there are big jocks on the other stations too. You can, to a certain extent, work out whether you are doing a good job. But yeah, is it 5? I suppose, look, you can say this, and this is not in any way trying to mudsler, because I think he's an absolutely brilliant broadcaster. But you think Chris Evans, right, obviously as a brilliant example of an amazing, natural, gifted, brilliant broadcaster. Brilliant, right? From when he went through his, Virgin days, then he went to Radio 1 and what have you, and then Radio 2 had this enormous audience, and then went to the new Virgin Radio, where you had 11 million on that station and you have 1 million on this station. You kind of go, oh, they didn't all follow me there. But because a lot of people just like what they have. It's not like they don't like him, but it's like, well, some did. A million went over and went, oh, I'll follow you. But 10 million didn't. They went, oh, stay here and have Zoe Ball.
I suppose it's like
Radio 2.
In some ways, it's mistaking yourself for the chef when you're actually the waiter. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're serving the product, but the product is the station and the music that you're playing and the general vibe and feel and branding up. So you're serving it up to people. But then if the waiter moved from this restaurant to the next restaurant, you wouldn't necessarily follow the waiter over there, would you? You'd stay with the product that you're familiar with and that you've grown accustomed to.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, people generally, and I've always grown up, I really got into radio when I ended up at university in America for a bit, and I heard amazing American radio in the early 80s, when British radio was pretty dull. All commercial radio was very magazine-y, and middle of the road, it was dull. I'm sorry, it was. And the Americans were, it was unbelievable. It was just like, they had thousands of stations, marketed brilliantly, and it just all sounded exciting. And that's what made me go, I want to be on the radio. Yeah. And I think we ended up actually in the UK, but understanding what made better radio. And we had great radio really good radio over here for a time. I think, and I think what you worked out was that each radio station, if it's done well, a radio station has a personality. Okay, of its own. It has a feel, and it's made up from clearly the kind of music it plays, the kind of jingles it has, the way it does its news, the way it does its traffic, the kind of presenters it employs. All those things give it a feel where you just kind of, in the olden days when, in a way, radio was king, and I suppose for anyone 30 and above, really, you kind of you just liked the feel of a station. So you might have just gone, I kind of like how Capital does things. Or you go, oh, it's all a bit loud and brash. I kind of like a bit more BBC Radio London. Or I like Radio 2. You liked, it's like choosing your friends. Sometimes people want the big loud ones, and sometimes I want someone who's a bit quirky and alternative. And I think radio was a bit like that. At the moment, it's all a bit shiny and bland in the really big mainstream. But you definitely, I guess, still pick your tribe, and that's what it is. You're going, do I want heart? It's like happy handbag music, lots of Sister Sledge and ABBA, woohoo, and everything's positive in the world. Or do I want Radio X, where it's like, okay, I'm a bit more grungy, here's something a bit more alternative, and Moyles will tell you a slightly cynical gag and do it in a very clever way. So, but again, it's all about finding who you want to hang out with that day, because that's what radio was. It's who you're hanging out with.
Did you, just out of curiosity, so when you were exposed to American radio and you came back here and you pursued it, did you envisage or did you imagine yourself as a presenter, as a jock, or would you actually have quite like were you into the music? Did the music interest you sufficiently that you would have quite liked to have been a John Peel?
Oh, I see. Well, I've always loved music, still love music, and have championed music. I guess a lot of the music I championed was pop and very mainstream.
Yeah.
And I guess I got into radio. I had this plan of when I was 24, working for a little station. I wanted to get on a big station. I wanted to be on Radio 1 or Capital. And I made a sort of vow to my dad, who thought I was insane to try and pursue this broadcasting career.
Yeah.
Because it was not a very secure career. And, I'd gone to school and a good uni and all this kind of stuff. And he went, come on, my son, you can be a captain of industry. And I go, yeah, promise I don't want to be. I want to be a jock. And he thought I was mental. But he said, please at least tell me you had a plan. So I did have this plan, and the plan all worked, went very well. I was 26, I was on Capital, and it was all going, well. And I loved it. I loved my time on Capital. I'd had a great time at Wyvern, my little station. Luxembourg was amazing for 9 months. Capital was brilliant. And then I went from Capital to Magic, which was a real gear change. But then we worked, me and my old boss, Richard Park, again, we worked together at Magic, thought we could do something clever here. So let's turn middle of the road mainstream into massive, and we turned it all into number one. And it was, so again, that wasn't as, there's no way that was as much fun as Capital. Capital was, as you said, massive stars, big gigs, glitzy, late 80s, 90s were amazing times. Really amazing times.
Who was the biggest star that I imagine you, to some extent, it becomes a sort of saturated experience, like you normalize it. But was there any one like massive star that you met in the offices of Capital where you were like, whoa, okay, this is big, like you're tongue tied, you got butterflies in the tummy?
We were lucky look, we'd interviewed everyone and done everything and been round to their houses or hotels or gone to their gigs. That was the nature of the beast. And I think the first time I interviewed Madonna was quite a daunting one, because I'd seen the interviews she had done with like Jonathan Ross, and they'd been quite awkward.
Right.
They'd been a bit sort of like, oh God, is this going to be quite hard? But I remember when we met her, we had to go over to Paris to interview her at a hotel, and sort of spend a couple of hours with her. And it was actually, she was just brilliant.
Really?
Me and my producer, yeah, but mainly because when she walked into the hotel suite where we were going to be doing this, I at the time was sitting on her toilet, okay, with my trousers around my ankles, and my producer was taking a photograph. We just thought it'd be so and I was sort of thumbs up, piss takey picture of me sitting on Madonna's bog, like, honestly. And then she walks in like, hey, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, we just said, we just thought it'd be really funny to take a picture on your toilet. And actually, thank God she found it funny.
Yeah.
And it kind of broke the ice, actually. So we actually had a really funny conversation with her, she was very funny, very witty.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the next time I did an interview with her, she remembered us for being a bit daft. And so we actually had another really funny...
You're the toilet guy. All right.
Yeah. And then, so look, we met some great people over the time, and had, I think, as a music lover, it's great meeting people, but I think the really beautiful thing is when you feel really privileged, is when you get to be in a situation where you're watching them play music very intimately. And we had a few bands that came in, and we did this thing where I used to do a show called The Jukebox, you may remember. People phone in, request a song.
Yeah.
Here's the song. And we did a few of those with some bands where we sort of had, hey, here's Bon Jovi in the studio with us, and pick your favorite Bon Jovi song and they'll play it for you.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
You know, so it's like, and you're hanging around, and that was brilliant. And so we did it with a few different artists, Brian Adams. And when you get to see them, you're literally in a tiny studio and you got their band in there and you go, wow, I'm really lucky.
Yeah,
this is
it's
a
like
really cool thing.
Up close, raw talent.
Oh,
Must be
mental.
really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose, and then over the years, you got to know some people. And I really did always like George Michael was such a nice man. But, you know, George in the end became a bit sort of paranoid, didn't really want to go out very much. So in the end, he'd say, well, look, just come around my house. We'll do the interview around there. And he'd go and sit, you know, around his house and have a cup of tea. And then he'd play you songs he was writing on his computer. So, and then you felt, God, I feel really lucky doing this. Because here's a really nice bloke who's a genius musician.
Yeah.
I mean, genius musician, and you're getting a chance to have a chat with them about how they make songs. And that's, again, as a music lover, you go, I'm really lucky.
Weirdly, I was talking to my missus about George Michael the other week. I was like, I always forget that he passed away, and it always feels like he was way too young to go when he did. And she and I had a sort of 5-10 minute conversation about him where we were like, the thing that, like, I wasn't like a huge, you know, frothing George Michael fan, but what I really loved about him was that not only was he very talented, not only was he British and monstrously successful the world over, which is always nice, I think, for a Brit to see someone do that, but it was the wit. It was the fact that when he was caught short, you know, in one of his very public situations, he then, like, he didn't put out some sort of big apologetic statement about it. He went away, recorded that song outside, sort of, you know, took the mick out of it, and then did a very tongue-in-cheek video about it all. And I was like, he doesn't take himself too seriously, or he didn't. You know, he seemed like a really nice guy, very charitable. And it's really, really sad that he's no longer with us.
It was very sad, actually, because he was like so many stars, I guess. You know, you realise that, look, they're all normal people. They're all normal, and they've all got their hang-ups. And I think a lot of famous people being in the sort of glare of constant publicity, I can't imagine what that is like. I can imagine it's not much fun, actually. Some of them do it and handle it really well. Others find it quite hard. I remember the first time I sort of met Bon Jovi was interesting, when they had that Slippery When Wet album out, which was just friggin'
massive.
Enormous.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know, after our interview, we met at a club in town, and after the interview, they sort of, I was wearing, I ride motorbikes, so I've always loved Harleys. And so I was wearing a Harley t-shirt, and they went, and I was carrying a helmet. They went, have you got your Harley outside? I went, yeah. And they all came out and wanted to look at my motorbike.
Yeah.
And we were sort of standing around my motorbike, you know, just down some corridor chatting bikes, because they were into their bikes. And I said, what are you guys doing now? And they went, I think we're just going to go and, you know, have a wander around town. Yeah. And I went, I'm not being silly, but when you say wander around town, do you literally just mean go and have a wander around the West End of London? They go, yeah. And I went, you're not going to get mobbed. And they go, well, we'll split up. We'll just go on our own. And then, but you know, you think John Bon Jovi's so recognizable, such a dude. Yeah. And you went, come on, just put on a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses. I just look like any other Yank.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a really healthy way of looking at fame. Yeah. They just think, you know what, actually, if we don't walk around with bodyguards next to us all the time, no one's going to know. Yeah. Whereas other people, and the other end of the scale were people like, you know, Britney Spears, when she came in, you know, it's like 6 huge bouncers, the giant, you know, black limos, and they had to, you know, check the route she was going to come into the building, you know, and check the lift out. And you go, honestly, it's just a frigging radio station. There's no one in here. We have people in here like her every single day. No one's going to like accost her, mug her, or anything. I think that's all to do with image as well. Yeah. And with management. A lot of management are absolute arseholes because they live their dreams through the fame that their artists have. And so they like to be all, you know, Bobby Big Bollocks and what have you.
The best example of that I ever heard, and this is going back a few years now, but it was when Macy Gray was first blowing up. And Sting and Macy Gray were both at the same award ceremony. And I remember reading somebody's report of it, probably in the Metro Showbiz page or something. And they were saying how Sting just turned up in his car with his wife And he gets up on stage and he, puts his bass on, he plays a little song, got out, gets back in his car, drives off home. No big deal. And this is Sting, like the Police, Shea Stadium, like global superstar. Then you got Macy Gray, who'd had like one hit song by that point, and she came in with like an entourage of like 20 security guards. And they were like, it's just ridiculous. But I think you're right. I think it is an image thing. It's like if you walk in with a lot of...
people judge the art, in a way we judge you, or you sort of judge Macy Gray on that. But actually, a lot of it will be her record label, her management, who'll kind of think it looks great, looks impressive. The one thing is, I remember having this great conversation once in a toilet with Matt Goss. Okay, so it's at the Cafe Royal.
To be clear, was it Matt Goss's toilet that you were sitting on before an interview?
We're at the Cafe Royal and at some big awards do that we were having at Capitol. And I noticed that him and his twin, Luke, had both turned up in separate, S-Class Mercedes to this do.
Right.
And I knew him really well because we'd known him since before he was famous. And now he was massive. Okay. And we're both just standing there having a pee. I mean, it sounds really weird, this, but... And I said, hey, Matt, how you doing? Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, how are you, mate? He's quite cute. And I said, hey, I noticed that you and Luke turn up in separate cars there. He went, yeah, well, got to have a bit of image, haven't you, really? I went, that costs you a bit. He goes, no, the record label are paying for it. I went, Matt, hello, you're paying for it?
Yeah. And
he went, no, the record label pay for it. I went, no, honestly, they do, but they'll pay for it, but it comes out of your profits, right? So they'll take off 500 quid a day for your S-Class and 500 quid for Luke's. And then so you'll end up with 1,000 quid less at the end of the day, trust me. And he looked at me like I was a madman. And I went, honestly, just ask the manager. And then the next time I saw him, he went, you were right. And I kind of get, better to share a car, really, isn't it? Not being silly, but, because I think a lot of these artists, when it all starts kicking off and happening, what they forget is they are actually footing the bill for everything.
Mm.
They only realize that when they get their statement.
Yeah, and then what is it they call it? Recoupment kicks in, and the record company's just like, security, lawyers, agent, A&R. You're paying for all of it. I know it seemed like we were showering you with all of these treats and everything, but actually, we're going to need that back.
So when they do show up on their own, it's really quite refreshing. I mean, I remember, it was probably about 2004, U2, who, again, let's be honest, one of the biggest bands of all time, actually. Mm. So they were celebrating getting to #1 on the album chart and the singles chart in the same week, something they'd never done in their career. And amazingly, they were still really excited about it because, they were going, made us feel really relevant, right? #1 album, #1 single. It's amazing. And at the time, as it is now, Capital Radio was based in Leicester Square. We'd moved from Euston Tower to Leicester Square. And they were all going to come on my drive time show to have a chat. And what was amazing, one by one, all of U2 turned up on their own, right? So Bono had wandered across Leicester Square and just come in on his own. And it's like, hello, I've come on to be on the show. And one by one, they all come in. And there were no bouncers. I think they had their manager with her or someone from someone from the record company. But again, they could have turned up and made a massive big deal. They just all wandered in. And then at the end of it, they all kind of just wandered off. And you go, wow, if you want to be, in a way, I guess, a little bit normal, you can.
Yeah.
You don't always have to be the big superstar.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's probably easier to, what's the word, sort of to action that humbleness now, as like we mentioned earlier about how nothing special anymore. There's, these radio stations and all that, like with the diluted relevance and the lack of specialness now, maybe it is easier to just like walk straight into a radio station.
No, I have to say, I still want to always say, I still love radio. Yeah. And I still think radio is special. I think there are it's just slightly changing. Like all these things, everything adapts, everything moves, nothing stays the same. So, talk radio is doing really well at the moment, and podcasts are doing really well. I mean, podcasts are interesting because when podcasts, and someone had given it a new name, podcast, when it first happened, you're going, wow, there are these new things called podcasts. And you go, it's just talk radio on demand. It's not like a new thing. It's just some people talking. It's
Well, I
just
think
Rogan just talking, but then you can just record it and go, I'd like to listen to it now, please, rather than have to listen to it, at 8 o'clock in the morning or when.
Well, I think what made it different for me was like, to me, it was something that could be produced independently, which is one of the things that excited me about it. Because like I used to do a lot of stand-up comedy back in the day, and I used to run my own nights. And before that, I did a lot of music, a lot of band stuff. And I was always hugely bought into the punk rock do-it-yourself aspect of things. And so when podcasting became a thing, and I jumped on it pretty late, I thought I'd sort of missed the boat. But one way or another, it seems to have attracted an audience, which is good. But it disappoints me a little bit when I see official radio stations putting out content on demand, is how I would see that stuff, as though like it will be branded as a podcast. Like, check out the LBC podcast. Don't forget to download the LBC. I'm like, that's not a podcast. Like, a podcast is two women having a glass of wine, exchanging stories about guys that they hooked up with like 10 years ago, and 10,000 people tune into it. They download it off Spotify. You can set it up cheaply on Pinecast. Like, it, to me, it feels indie and punk rock and DIY. Yeah. When it starts bleeding out into the mainstream and it becomes this sort of gentrification of broadcast, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's disappointing. I feel like it's being dragged away from the thing that made it special.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there was something beautiful about, and look, tech has changed so many things. It's enabled like this conversation to happen, from your home and my home, and we're just sitting there having this great chat and videoing it. Obviously a lot of the tech really, two things can often really change tech, and that's war is one of them, because suddenly the technological advances are massively made. And then look, we had a pandemic which did the same thing, when the world was told to stay at home and suddenly everyone was going, shit, we got to be in contact. How do we do this? And so Zooms and Teams and all these things, everything massively got a lot of money chucked at it. And now we can all exist like this. And cheap microphones that sound really good, link up to your computer on your mobile phone. It's brilliant, right? So we can all have access to it, which does make it feel you can make music. Look at Billie Eilish. Her and her brother make like multi-million selling albums, Grammy award-winning stuff in their frigging bedrooms, and it's fantastic, right? But it comes down to the talent that start using the tech. You have to be talented to start with. You can't polish a turd. Sure. Right? That great old expression. But I mean, look, the tech's been a fab thing, and I know what you mean. It feels like the official LBC, as you mentioned it, podcast is really, I suppose, well, this is the evolution of where radio is going to go. You kind of go, do I need to have a station that's here 24 hours, 7 days a week, 650, or can I just go, let's make a podcast for an hour and then listen to it when you're on the tube or when you're going to work or when you get home and you got a bit of time? It's sort of on demand is how the world is. Look at TV. I think you'll become a lot similar. So you watch what you want when you want, and you'll listen to what you want when you want.
I think you're probably right. I'd like to sort of round off, because I know we're a bit short on time now, so I'd like to round off with a couple of quick fire questions. Okay. They may or may not be actually that quick fire, but I'll try and get through them nice and quickly for you. Right. Here we go. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So, Neil Fox, you did the Pepsi chart. Mark Goodyear hosted the Radio 1 Top 40. Within those years, though, there were obviously chart rivalries. Take That and E17, Blur and Oasis. But who would win in a fight between you and Mark Goodyear?
We won. We won. And I say we because when I was the face of the Pepsi chart, and I started it in 93 and we ended in 2005, and there was a massive team of people that put it together. I thought for a second you meant we were, as in you and Mark Goodyear had teamed up and beaten people like in a pub together. Oh, like, I said, no, we beat people. No. Well, we beat, obviously we ended up, when we started doing the chart, I mean, Radio 1, I think had 4 times the listenership of us. What was the old network chart didn't do that well. And then the Pepsi chart changed the whole format. We changed so much about that show, and it became a very entertaining Sunday afternoon show, very different really from the Radio 1 chart. So we gave there was a proper alternative. You could either have us, which was a bit bright and loud and different, or theirs, which was at 40, at 39, at 38. So they did theirs in a traditional way, and we did a whole new way, and we ended up doing rather better in the ratings. But he was, I mean, Mark Goodyear and I know Mark really well. He was a brilliant jock and really lovely fella. And actually, we had this really lovely, friendly rivalry while we were doing it all the time between us. What's amazing, between us, about 10 million people on a Sunday afternoon listen to a countdown. Which is incredible.
Okay, question 2. Most DJs can choose what songs they want to play, either from the A list or B list or whatever, or if it's a nighttime show, maybe the selection is a little bit more about what they personally want to play. But hosting a top 40 show means you're basically just told what to play again and again. Was there ever a time when you thought, do you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to play OK Computer from start to finish?
There were definitely times when of course we get bored of seeing the same old thing, but I'm going to say the sort of politically correct answer to this is you always kind of go, if you play for Chelsea, you're going to have to wear a blue shirt, right? So if I decided I want to work for Capital Radio, which is a massive #1 top 40 station, it comes with, I've got to wear the blue shirt, right? I can't suddenly go, but I really want to play that amazing album track from Blur. Or my boss would go, well, you fucking well can't, all right? And he was very funny. Sometimes people did try and play their own songs.
Yeah.
And I remember very famously he said, it's a great song, Foxy, in that broad Scottish accent. He says, if you want it, go home and play it on fucking repeat if you want to, but not on my station. And that's, to a certain extent, I kind of understand it. Yeah. At the same point, there were songs that you'd listen to and kind of go, God, I really like this. So I remember first hearing, it's a random song, this, Enigma and Sadness. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The Gregorian monks set to a dance beat.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing it somewhere thinking, this is really cool. And I wanted to play it on my show. And so I did. I mean, it wasn't like a crazy song, was it? It ended up at #1.
Yeah.
But I remember sort of them going, why are you playing that? We just thought it's going to be massive.
Yeah.
And there was a certain amount in the evenings where you could get away with more because we were maybe a little bit more about new music, but new mainstream music, not new music like John Peel new music, but here was lots of new stuff. So if you're a kid growing up listening to Kappa, you probably know we were going to play big stuff first.
Yeah. There's that old adage, what was it, like revenue by day, reputation by night, right? So at night time, fewer people listening, fewer advertisers, maybe you get away with something a little bit more experimental. Question 3.
Yeah.
If there was a new show out on Amazon Prime or Netflix or something, and the show was called Times I Was a Bellend, what episode of your life would you donate to it?
When have I been an absolute bellend? Do you know, I think without realizing, I'm sure my wife would tell you many times. I think there are moments probably when I look back and you think, oh my, actually, I tell you, there was a day, and I often look back and go, what a twat. And this is not meant to sound, I was with a friend of mine who was a famous actor, and this sounds like a really sort of, and I was going to interview Robin Williams, not Robbie, but Robin Williams.
Okay.
And my mate was going to come with me because he really liked Robin Williams, right? And we'd had a problem, and we ended up an hour early for this thing. And on impulse, I went out and bought a car.
Right.
We're in Park Lane, and I bought a Porsche.
Right. Okay.
And it wasn't like I didn't want a car. I had been looking at it. We said, let's just went out and we'll just do it, right? And I remember afterwards just going home slightly thinking, what a twat. I was a really sort of, it all felt a bit, it was all a bit.
I mean, at least you knew.
A bit full of myself. Even at the time, I remember thinking, that was a bit of a tossy thing to do, wasn't it? The whole thing about it was a bit, it was just a bit idiotic, really.
At least you knew that you were buying a car for yourself rather than the record company supplying one, and then you find out.
Yeah, I know. I knew it was going to come out of my money. I suppose over the years as well, I think if you do get really well known, I've tried to always be a normal bloke. When I'm just a normal bloke that was in a job. Famous is a strange thing because it does turn people into weird people sometimes. And I've always said, just because you're in if you're a famous actor or famous singer, why does that why do you feel it gives you the right to act like a twat towards someone? Why? Or be rude to someone? So I've always tried to go, no, everyone's got their story to tell. Everyone's the same, really. I just was always in a job where people either knew who I was because I was on telly, or they listened to me on the radio, so they knew who I was. So that's why they wanted to speak to me. But it didn't necessarily make me better or different from anyone. It just had, my job did. So I've always genuinely tried to go. And I think most people I know, I'm sure there must have been times when I've probably been a bit of a tosser. Where you may have been full of yourself, but I've really tried not to.
You would think it would sort of
naturally me.
You'd think as you get better known, more famous, you would expect that would put more of a veneer over people, like they would be extra careful about how they come off. But I think you're right. I think for some people, maybe it gives them license in some psychological capacity to act like the big dog, maybe. I don't know.
I've never tried work. I've always, because I think I've had quite a lot of big famous people that I've seen act really badly, and you kind of go, why would you do that? When you've seen it up close, you kind of go, just like a knob. Why would you do that?
Okay. I've got 2 more questions. So, question number 4. When you were on Brass Eye for the Peter special, how exactly did you end up reading?
Did they get us? Look, do you know what's really interesting about that? I mean, that was a really, really clever TV show.
Yeah.
Because what they did was, obviously you don't see, what I'd say, the whole process.
Right.
So they, and actually, so it came as a request from our press office who've been contacted. We're doing a show. Can we come and film? So you kind of think, it's all come from legitimate reasons, and the press people have come in, and then you end up in a way, they get you to say more and more ridiculous things. And I've watched other ones as well where the sort of same thing happened, and then sort of all of a sudden when they edit it all together, you end up going, how did I not see this coming? That's very, very clever show.
Did they get you? Was it like a slow frog, like boiling slowly in the so they ask you to say 50 different things like in a row, and that was just like one of them, and then they're like, we got him? Or I genuinely, because that's a long time ago now, I generally can't exactly remember the process, but all I remember was when we watched it, you kind of going, fuck, how did they get us to that stage? But
I think they were very clever, those programs. Actually, there isn't anything quite like it now, where maybe it's because people are getting wiser to, in a way, people doing those sort of mock documentaries. But actually, I was going to say, I think people are as gullible as ever, and there is probably a whole host of people that, from all those reality shows and what have you, that want to be on anything else, and they'd probably say yes to anything. Do you know what I mean? But they were a clever team. I have to take my hat off. We sort of went, clever team, clever people. Who was the lead guy of that? Because
Chris Morris.
Chris Morris, very, very smart. And you watch the other stuff he did, you kind of go, they were clever.
Yeah. And I think there's something really nice, and what I'm picking up from the way that you were talking before about people who are famous and they act like a bit of a bellend, and then this is like, there's something really nice about when somebody just kind of holds their hands up and goes like, all right, you got me, fine,
Well, they were, I think it's really good to admire people. I always admire people when they're doing a good job, right? Or when they've done something clever. And I think, I used to watch that show all the time, and it was just very cleverly done. It took a lot of intelligence to do what they did. And also, like a lot of those really good setups, if you know what I mean, they take an awful lot of planning. And they do take a lot of planning.
It's like social conditioning, fermenting, getting to know the person, and
all of that. And also just the whole premise of how they approach, say, Capital Radio. They've done it all in the right way, so everything felt like it's all been done legitimately. And I suppose you don't see, there are no red flags going up.
Very
clever stuff. Take my hat, very clever team.
So in that spirit, my last question is, would you mind now re-recording the line for me now? But could you say, hi, I'm DJ Neil Fox. Tune in to Aid Thompson and Other Disappointments tonight for a stimulating discussion about media. There's no real evidence to suggest it will be, but it is scientific fact.
That's a very long expression to be said. Hello, I'm Neil Fox, and can I please recommend that you tune into Aid Thompson's brilliant podcast, of which I will be a feature of. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion about media and other topics, of course. There's no scientific proof to say that he is a genius, but he clearly is.
Thank you so much, Neil Fox. Okay, guys, thank you very much for everyone that's tuned in. If you've enjoyed this episode, or perhaps some of the other stuff that I've put out, do consider popping a little super thanks tip in the tip cup for me here on YouTube. Or if you've been enjoying all of the other content that I've been putting out for a while, why not consider joining my goddamn cult over on Patreon or here on YouTube? If you click on my profile, click the little join button, you can find the links in the description also. And if you join Patreon or the community thing on this, you get episodes of the podcast 2 days before everybody else. We've got a Discord chat. I'm in there before and after most episodes as they go out. We're currently organising the next London meetup. That's going to take place in March. You get first dibs for the live shows for tickets. We did one in Soho last year, one in Tower Hill, one at Glastonbury. I think there should be more dates coming up soon. I just need to check in with Danny Price. Also, I'm in the process of organising the monthly one-to-one Skype calls with my Patreons, my backers. And finally, you get credited or named and shamed at the end of shows like this. So, big thanks to Rachel Harris, Bowman, Kai, Chris D, David Voice, Martin Maracas, Mojo Sabian, Peter Del Monte, Pingu, Stuart Chesmar, T-Rex in a top hat, Aaron Smith, Alex Suter, Jeff McGow, MJ Nichols, Ned Berg, Sarah Setters, Simon Flack, my namesake, Aid, Margaret Abogai, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Encore une fois, Cycletricity, and Christine Cash. Thank you so much, guys, for your continued support of the show. That's it from me. Thanks once again to my guest for this evening, Neil Fox, and I'll be back next week with the solo show Tuesday night. Until then, keep it strictly #Binfluencer, and I'm out this motherfucker.